Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another edition of Café New Canadians. And today we're going to be discussing a topic, immigrants' journey to success, and we're speaking to the African community. We are glad that you could join us wherever you're joining us from. And this Café New Canadians is brought to you by New Canadians TV, a web and TV series that brings you information of relevance to newcomers in Canada, information on settlement, information on business, small businesses, entrepreneurship, immigration, international students, among others. Today, I am delighted to host a few members from the African community. But before that, you can watch us, New Canadians. You can watch us on Omni Television, you can watch us on YouTube, and you can also find us on our website, newcanadians.tv and youtube.com/New Canadians. My name is Gertrude Tumusime, and today I am hosting Taiwo Afolabi, the manager, community and artistic connections, Periphery Theatre. I am also hosting Chidimma Eghagha, Senior Manager, Financial Instruments and Securities Reporting, RBC, and Otis Mushonga, Manager, Program and Services, Access Community Capital Fund. You are all welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, and today our topic, immigrants' journey to success, and we are speaking to immigrants from the African community. Now, the lady and gentlemen that I just introduced to you all come from different parts of Africa. In this part of the world, the Western world, Europe, the Americas, and everywhere, when they hear Africa, they assume that Africa is one country, but that's not true. Africa has 54 countries. And these gentlemen and lady right here come from different countries. They will be telling us a little bit more about themselves and their journeys, but and where they come from. Actually, I don't want to speak for them, but yes, yeah. So as I was saying, Africa is such a huge continent, and with different people speaking different languages from 54 different countries. Now, today we would like to talk about the African immigrants' journey to success. We are going to hear it from people who have immigrated here from Africa, what the journey has been like for them, what their challenges have been, what they're doing, and how they are bettering it for other people to come in and so on. Welcome once again to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gertrude.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gertrude.
Where do we start? Let's start with the lady, Chidimma Eghagha. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, when you came to Canada, and what the experience was like for you?
Okay, thanks for the opportunity to go first, Gertrude. So my family and I finally immigrated to Canada in 2016, August 2016 specifically. And we came from Nigeria, like you said, the beautiful country of Nigeria. You mentioned Africa having so many countries, and I'll say one thing that I find fascinating about Nigeria is it's one country, but we have over 200 languages. So, and like English is our lingua franca. We basically speak English because it's not possible for one person to understand all the languages, right? So my family and I landed here in August of 2016, and I was actually very excited to come. I had a very promising career. I was an accountant, a designated accountant, both locally in my home country, Nigeria, and internationally, because I had a UK designation also. So, and I had an MBA from one of the top schools also in the UK. So for me, I felt like I was all set to make a success here in Canada. To put the icing on the cake, my husband, who is an IT professional, also got interviews, you know, for his dream job right from Nigeria. Like he had 3 interview sessions from Nigeria. So I felt, you know what, we're ready, we're set, we're ready to come and blast off right in Canada. So I came with my expectations.
Rosy.
Yeah, exactly. I came with my expectations very high, right? And I really didn't for any second think that I was going to have a challenge. So when I arrived in Canada, I took a conscious decision to go on a 3-month vacation. That's what I called it. I wanted to relax, settle my family, my kids and my husband, and then I'll start looking for a job. Well, the 3 months stretched to a very long 10-month period of silence. I call it a period of silence because I sent, oh my God, uncountable numbers of applications, and I never got a response. There was never a yes. I never had a phone interview. I never had a first interview. It all just ended with, thank you for your application. We're moving on. You were not successful this time. So in 10 months, I moved from 100 to 0. And I had to rethink my approach to job search. I had to rethink my expectation and reset my expectation. I had to take a step back and ask myself, what can I do differently? And that 10-month period was really a period of growth for me, personal growth and mental growth. I leverage opportunities of government-sponsored bridging programs. I also leverage the opportunities of community network like the Black Female Accountants Network, which I belong to build my confidence again, to re-strategize and know how to actually look for a job here in Canada. And the good news was after 10 months, I got my first interview, which landed me my first contract position in one of the top banks in Canada as a financial analyst. And from there, the fun continued. So I'm looking forward to sharing that story on this call.
Wow, yours seems like a very short, successful story, right? I believe that people watching us right now on Zoom have some questions. We'll have some questions for you and for the rest of the panel. Just a reminder, if you're on Zoom, you can send your questions in the Q&A tab. And if you're on YouTube, in the comments section, just type in your questions and the panelists will be ready to take those questions later in this webinar. Wow. So Otis, tell us about your journey. How do you get to Canada, and when and how was the experience for you arriving here?
Okay, I swam to Canada, but that's one of the perceptions of some people who may not know that you can actually fly to Canada from where we are coming from. I'm originally from Zimbabwe. You can see with my background that is a representation of Zimbabwe right there. It's the Great Zimbabwe Ruins, from which our country's name is derived from. So I came to Canada in 2006, and by way of the US. So I was in the US for a while and studying, and then decided to take the opportunity that came up to come to Canada. And one of the key differences you notice as you're coming from the US, the set of questions you get when you're in, especially in the part of, I was in Baltimore, Maryland, the interactions there are totally different when you come here, because I think of the diversity that is represented here. So that's one key thing you quickly notice, especially if you're moving from the US, depending on where you're coming from and what your experience is. And for me, it quickly became apparent that here I don't so much have to prove where I'm from or to answer any questions about where Africa is and where Zimbabwe is by way of what Canada represents in terms of the diversity here. So I came here and obviously at that time I was single and looking at what opportunities lay in for me. One of the key things that I'm passionate about is connecting with people, public speaking, all of these things. So I decided to look for roles, especially through volunteering. So one of the key ways that I got involved in was through volunteering in one of the major volunteer centers here in Toronto, the Volunteer Center of Toronto, Volunteer Toronto as it is known. I got involved through them, just doing outreach, connecting with different people and connecting with different communities, talking about how volunteering is a great way of getting to know the country or your city and getting involved in various causes that you're passionate about. So that gave me an opportunity to actually see and learn about different things happening in Toronto and communities and organizations. And my passion has always been also working in the nonprofit sector and helping others and being of service in that way. So that gave me an entryway into the opportunity, which I ended up actually transitioning from volunteering with Volunteer Toronto to becoming staff on Volunteer Toronto. So I'm highlighting this to say that usually there's a perception of volunteering, if I'm not earning money from it, then it's not something that I should totally devote myself to or look to as a way to as a viable means of building my networks in Canada. And we know that in Canada, volunteering is a big part of your civic responsibility, but also a way that you build skills as well as networks, as well as being recognized by employers as a key source of, I would say, building your resume as well. So that I got involved in that. Then actually through that, able to connect to another opportunity that got me to where I am now with the organization that I am now, Access Community Capital Fund. So it has been sort of that direct link through volunteering that has got me to where I am today in terms of the opportunities that opened up for me. So that's kind of a unique story that I can highlight, and I'm happy to share more about my experience.
Okay. So we get back to your story much later for the most interesting bit of it. Yeah, but first let's hear from Taiwo. Taiwo, how's Victoria?
Victoria is good, sunny, beautiful. I came into my story is kind of a little slightly different. I'm originally from Nigeria, and like Chidimma said, it's a beautiful country. It has over 180 million population now. So yeah, it's
260.
over 180 million population now. So it's really huge country. I came in September 2015 as a student, as an international student. So my passage to Canada my route really was through studying, and I find that sort of created different realities and a different privilege, different opportunities that I'm of course I'm going to speak into some of them as we go on in this chat conversation today. So I came in September 2015 to do my master's in applied theater at the University of Victoria. Prior to coming here, I had my own theater company in Nigeria called Theater Emission International. I'm an artist, an actor, the director, and I do a lot of productions. And prior to coming here, I've actually worked in over 5 countries across 3 continents. So I sort of had that, that, as it were, sort of that knowledge base and kind of what I wanted to do and all of that. So when I came here, I was able to convert my master's to a PhD, and that in itself, the fact that I came in through studying kind of opened a lot of opportunities, which is very interesting. But beyond that is I came in at a pivotal time of history in Canada when the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that made a commitment that Canada was going to be relocating, refugees of I think 25,000. That was part of the commitment. And when I got to Victoria, it's unlike Toronto or Victoria is in terms of diversity, it's really growing. And so for me, when I came in, I started asking myself, as an artist or who works in community, first thing that is very important to me is, are there any issues in community that my art can tackle? So I'm really about using my art to solve problems, and I'm using problem in a very loose term, not in a derogatory manner at all, but really thinking about in what way can my art really contribute to the existence and the ecology and all of the ideas that are happening. So with that, I was thinking, well, new people are going to come into Victoria. They are coming into Victoria, whether from Africa or from Syria, from, wherever part of the world. And then we need to start talking about interaction. We need to start talking about engagement. We need to start talking about diversity. And my background as an artist and knowing the things that I use theater to do, I started reaching out to organizations. How can we better use theater to talk about multiculturalism? How can we use theater to talk about racism? How can we use theater to talk about community engagement? So I started doing that, and that really opened up that opportunity. And for me, which is really part of the strength that we have in Canada, is that it's not just about, it's really, we're so privileged and so blessed that we're in a country where if you have a vision, you see a need that you can actually meet, that, there is that opportunity to explore. So from there, I did different projects with different organizations, Intercultural Association of Greater Victoria, with VERX, with the University of Victoria, City of Victoria, District of Saanich. So, I was just really reaching out to different communities, and I was able to build different partners. And of course, at the end of the day, really still doing my studies and all of that. And now, now I'm working with the regional theater called Belfry Theater, as part of, the cultural ecology in the whole of, in Victoria, and of course on the island. So, and I'll chat more about that. But I think for me, what was kind of very important is really thinking what I have, how can I leverage what I have in solving some of the issues that are kind of critical to our existence in our community. And I think that that's something that was very powerful for me and did help me.
Thank you so much for sharing. Now, 2 people from Nigeria and 1 person from Zimbabwe. I know Nigeria has a very, very, very big population, the largest in Africa. I guess that's why we have 2 people, because the chances of finding a Nigerian in Canada is actually higher than finding one from any other part of Africa. Actually, sometimes when you move and people ask you, are you from Africa? Yes. Nigeria? That's the first thing they say. You guys are so popular. Anyway, we want to understand in this conversation, when you set out to immigrate to Canada, whether as a student and you thought you would come and do your education and go back, whether as a person who has said, you know what, I'm immigrating, I'm coming to Canada. You had expectations, and Chidimma really shared a little bit about that. But when you arrived, did your expectations meet what the reality is or was on the ground at the time you arrived? Let's go, Otis.
I mean, it was obviously, yes, you have expectations. You think that you quickly transition into settling down and move into a career, or do whatever is meaningful to you that will put you in a much more better position than you were before. So there are those expectations. Obviously, most of them will likely not be met. And I think the key is always to how do you then adapt from there and rewire yourself so that you don't get into a place where you fall into a state of depression and to a state of feeling that you probably made the wrong decision to come, which a lot happens in the context, and also working with other newcomers to Canada in my line of work. All of these issues that many have experienced. Some have actually decided to pack and leave and go back. So there are those cases that are out there. But it's all about finding the networks, making sure that you connect yourself to community, to networks that help you and direct you in the right path. Obviously, there will be challenges along the way. You may have to pick up a survival job, as they're called, while you're working on advancing yourself so that you can work in your professional field or fulfill your dream. There are those as well. You may have the opportunity. You may be fortunate enough to move directly into, your career path. That's also true. But when I came here, I would say it was more of, yes, there is a bit of a sense of there is more opportunities that I could take advantage of, and probably what is the best way that I could leverage the opportunity. In my case, I talked about volunteering as a key entry way to the opportunities that have opened up for me. And it was more about the passion that I had for doing what I was doing. And obviously realizing that through that, you're going to make connections which will then advance you in the direction that you want to go. So yes, obviously I'm not saying everything was fulfilled for me. I obviously didn't have everything fall into place right away. I had to stick with it and continue to find my way around, so that initial expectations those expectations that I had about Canada, I wouldn't say they were entirely wrong, but at the same time I wouldn't say it was entirely like a pathway paved with gold that you could just simply walk in and everything is there for you. So there was that experience. So it was a bit of a mixed bag of experiences, but ultimately I think it was more about what I was willing to do and to adapt in the given situations that came my way, that probably set me in the path where I am now.
Okay.
So I think that's probably my take on your question there.
Yeah, Otis, I would like to understand, how long did it take you to find your first job, for example? Because I mean, finding a job is survival, is everyone's first kind of dream. When I get to Canada, I have to find a job and get going and get a survival, So how long did it take you?
I would say, so through, and by job, you mean something that's meaningful and more in line with,
okay.
I guess that's where you're coming from, because...
Question rephrased.
Yes.
How long did it take you to find meaningful employment? What we call meaningful.
Meaningful,
what was
yes.
meaningful to you?
Yeah, so I would say it took me, and let me put it this way. I had opportunities while in my volunteer role to fill in for a few people while, whether it was, a vacation, filling in for someone who had gone on vacation or on an extended leave for some reason. So that gave me a foot in the door. Through my volunteer work, it gave me a foot in the door to actually move a step forward in actually moving into a paid position while pursuing the two at the same time. Then over time, and I would say probably 3 years or so in, I was able to move into a more permanent position that then from there, it kind of started to make meaningful and makes better.
Understood. Yours was a little quick, but not quicker than Chidimma's. Not so Chidimma. So what was did your expectations meet the reality on the ground when you came to Canada?
Oh, definitely not. And Gertrude, I don't know that 10 months is quick. Like, I was expecting to get a job within
really
a month.
Quick. Average is like 10 years or what?
Honestly, I was expecting to get a job in like a month or two. So having to wait 10 months was, for me, it was really a long wait.
Welcome to Canada.
Yeah, and even just considering the fact that when I looked at my own career history, right, I've never had to have a break that long. So that was the first time in my life that I've been out of a job and unable to get a job for that space of time. So for me, it felt like eternity. Yes. Yeah. Anyways, but I agree with Otis, and I would just piggyback off what Otis said. There were 2 points he made that I think was really critical and pivotal to me. So he talked about being flexible, and he talked about being aware of your mental health. For me, those two things were really critical in the 10 months I came. My expectation definitely didn't meet the reality on ground. Like I said, I came in, and because my husband was able to get a job interview from Nigeria, I came in with the expectation that my transition into the workforce was going to be smooth, that once I was ready, I would apply and I'll be called, right? So it was really a shock that more than 100 applications later, like I was literally chalking out these things like 20, 30 a day, and everything was coming back. No, no, no. So my self-esteem, my confidence took a big hit. It took a really, really big hit. So that's why I liked when Otis pointed that out. I think it's something that immigrants need to be aware of, really aware of, because it's an unconscious eroding of your confidence. which could impact you as you go into the workforce. So you need to be mindful of your mental health. Yeah, so when I came in, as usual, like I thought, oh, just go in, look for the jobs, sign up for Worker Police, Indeed, like all of them, go to the recruiters, share your resume, you will get something. And that's what I did. I did that unsuccessfully for about 6 months. Okay, maybe a bit less than 6 months. I would just say this, that by January of 2014, because I hear here when people are saying people have gone back. Honestly, January 2017, I remember New Year's Eve. I wrote it down on my journal. I was like, if I don't get a job this January, I'm going back. I wrote it down in my journal. Like I'd gotten to the point where I was like, I can't do this. Why would I leave a good career to come here and have nothing? I wrote it down, and I remember having a conversation, and my husband was encouraging me. He said, you know what, just give it a shot with an open mind. Try something different. That was what he said. He said, try something different. And that January, I took a decision to try something different. Yeah. I started volunteering, like Otis said. See, volunteering is such a powerful tool. And for me, when I was volunteering, it was more like I needed to have a reaffirmation that I could give something back to the society, because I had come to a mental state where I felt I had nothing to offer, because every door I knocked on, the answer I had was a no. So I started with my children's school. I signed up as a volunteer parent. I would go with the kids for excursion. And then I got involved in organizing a fair for the kids, where I kind of taught the kids simple math, right? We had them come to shop for things, and I was working with the JKs and the SK students, and you teach them how to add up the cents and the dollars and all of that, right? And I started putting that on my profile too on LinkedIn, to say I was teaching mathematical accuracy and financial accuracy, to primary school kids. Now that thing, it did two things for me. First of all, it helped me gain some Canadian experience, because it showed that I could integrate with my community.
True.
The second thing it did for me too was that it kind of gave me a feeling of self-worth back. Like I felt like, okay, I am contributing. So it was a two-way street. Like when I went to do it, I just needed a reason to get up and leave the house, right? I wanted to get my mind off the no's I was receiving and get involved in something, right? That was why I started volunteering. But the returns I got from it was much more than I expected when I went into it. Okay. Right. And I really like that Otis said, sometimes we feel like, why would I invest my time in something that is not paying me? Sometimes your reward or what you get back is not intrinsic in the sense of dollar, but the value it brings to you. First, it shows you're able to integrate with your community. You're willing to give back, which is a big thing here in Canada. That's and then true. Secondly, for me, like I said, it helped my self-esteem, because I finally felt valued. Even though it was with kindergarten kids, I felt like I was bringing value to somebody, and it helped me take my perspective away from the things that were not working in my life to focus more on the things that were positive. And the truth is, when you're having a conversation with somebody and you're looking for a job, your vibe translates, right? And when you've heard no's and you're coming to such a conversation from a place of desperation, like I need this, you might not be aware, but it's translating. People can feel it. So volunteering, it helped me in the sense that I became less desperate, and I became more confident in the value I was bringing to the table. And I want to believe that it did impact the way I communicated myself, but when I was writing, my cover letters, and also when I was speaking with people. Yeah. He also gave me the opportunity to expand my network, because I met with people who would say, oh, you know what, talk to this person, you're an accountant, do this, do that, right? Meet up with these people. Oh, there's an opening here. And I mentioned earlier too that I got involved with a community network. It's called Black Female Accountants Network. So the network is just a network of people of African or Caribbean heritage who are accountants, and kind of we come together, help ourselves, we give our members a platform to develop themselves. So we do things like resume reviews. We give people opportunity to practice their public speaking. So that network really helped me also to build my confidence as I got into the workforce. So those were some of the things that I did, just to bridge the gap between my expectation and the reality that I met, because it's different. You've not lived in Canada. So it's hard to prepare for a place you've never been in.
Yeah, exactly.
You can think of what it will feel like, but it's not always exactly the same thing. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Chidimma, for sharing. That's certainly very, very enlightening. And I guess our attendees are really, really taking notes, because from that kind of experience, there's a lot of takeaways. And Taiwo, I know that for you, I mean, yours was kind of a smooth kind of, transition from being a student, and then you kind of know or knew what you wanted to get into, and yours is something that you started to create. How was that for you?
Well, I think that the fact that I was a student gave me the opportunity to kind of do all of these things that Chidimma and Otis said. So I did volunteer different places. I had to do survival jobs myself, even as a student. I was saying earlier on that looking for opportunities, how can I add value in my community? So I reached out to organizations, especially organizations that were working with immigrants and newcomers and refugees. How we can use storytelling, theater, to talk about their stories and all. And you see, by me reaching out to them, and I remember the first piece that I did in 2017, actually, it was volunteering. I spent over 100 hours, directing the performance, acting in the performance, taking the performance on a tour around the city. And of course, the following year, we were able to apply for funding with the BC Art Council, and we got funding and all of that. So I think because I was a student, that gave me time to be able to kind of use all of these tools that I knew about already. Now, in terms of expectation, I mean, before I left Nigeria, I knew I'm a student and I'm coming to come and study and all of that. But don't forget the fact that I had my own theater company in Nigeria before coming here. So again, yes, you are a student, but at the same time, I think you understanding the fact that I'm coming to a new place and I'm thinking, what do I have on me or with me as a tool or that I can actually use? So, because I think there are times that us as immigrants, we always, there are times that we feel we get to a new place, we don't think of what we have to get what we want. And there are times, just like Chidimma was saying, she's got all of these things already. She just needed to tweak it in a different light, in a different way to get whatever she wanted. So for me, I picked all of that, my theater skills, community connection, community engagement, interaction, play building, and all of those things, just bring them together. And I started thinking, oh, I can use this, right? So that even as I'm doing the survivor job, I had to do that for like 6-7 months, as a student, I had to survive and all of that. I was still doing that aside and trying to, build myself, build my resume and all of that. But what was really, which is really critical to me personally, is that I'm thinking, wherever I find myself, I think there are needs that I can, in a way, I can meet, or I can use what I have to be able to leverage on what I have.
And I think that's a very nice mentality to have, by the way.
Thank you, Trudy. And I think for me that has been sort of a guiding thing. And the other thing to add to it is, I know that we don't talk about this all the time in this part of the world. I think my own faith was really very helpful in processing some of these things. I faced disappointment in different ways as a student, being the only one in the class, for example, that looked like this, and you have to talk, you have to do so many things and all of that, and you have to apply for so many things. I think that world on its own, and even many times moving from that studentship to even getting a job, can be as tedious for an immigrant as someone coming in fresh. So I think my faith was really very helpful in that I had to pray to God, please direct me, help me, give me wisdom on how to do some of these things. So there are times that I share my experience and somebody's like, oh, I remember I was doing this play building exercise and with this community and of immigrant newly arrived youth. And they were sharing some things with me in terms of when you get to a new place, in terms of your name, for example, the name you put on your CV and all of those practical, even though they are very, very little, but they are very practical, that if your name doesn't sound this particular way, so you're not going to get connected, you're not going to get, and so
that we cannot pronounce your name Afolabi.
You know, so you can't. Afolabi is even very. I mean, people can pronounce that. There's some couple of names that honestly, once they see it, it's like, oh my God, well, we can. And because people are very trying in a very, good way to be very respectful. We don't want to call, all of those little details. But because I was working in community, I heard those stories. I heard where somebody said, maybe I would have done it like this and all of that. And so for me, I was able to kind of listen to some of those stories to kind of piggyback on people's, lived experience, because some of these stories are very powerful. And that kind of did help me too. And I think the reason I'm saying that is because forums like this, it's important because we are able to hear other people's experiences. Instead of, Chidimma just shared some of the things that she had to do. Rather than me not doing that, I can learn from that wisdom and just think, you know what, I'm going to go volunteer, if I'm, or I'm going to, do 1 or 2 courses to help me so that I can, get the Canadian experience, or I'm going to, whatever that we all need. And of course, look at, what value can I add to my community? I think that where we are right now in the world, that value is just very, very important.
Okay.
So I think those are some of my own experiences that I think are kind of very, very, they were very helpful.
Thank you for sharing. We are going to get back and talk about specific challenges for people or immigrants from Africa. And I know each one of you should have a story about that. But let's take a few questions from our attendees. And this is for you, Chidimma. Interesting story, Chidimma. Somebody says, Modupe. What was the thing that you did differently in your job search that ultimately helped you to land your first job? So would you like to share that?
Okay, yeah. So one of the first things I stopped doing was sending out 20, 30 applications every day. Because that on itself takes your whole day, takes your whole time, takes your whole energy. And when you look at the results you get from it, it's not always commensurate to the effort you put into it.
It frustrates.
And I realized that shooting all my arrows every day wasn't getting me anywhere, and I needed to do things differently. I took a step back and I asked myself, and also this is part of the feedback I got from, just networking with people and talking to people about my career search journey, right? That here in Canada, it's more of a specialist, like most roles are specialist roles. Back home in Nigeria, honestly, when I look at what I did, it seems like I'm doing 10 things at the same time. And I had all of that in my resume. So someone looking at it is not seeing depth. They're not seeing depth in any of my competencies. They're seeing a wide breadth of things. So I'm coming across as a jack of all trades and a master of none. So I had to do a skills analysis to say, what skills do I bring to the table? Sure. And what job roles do they fit into? And I realized that I had 7 different job roles I could confidently speak to based on my qualification and my experience. I had all of this in one resume. So I had to split it out, right? I had to identify what should sit where. The second thing I did was to take an inventory of my stories. So I did, I had worked over 15 years before I came to Canada. So I did have a lot of stories to tell professionally. I took the time to write out these stories and categorize it. Which of these stories fit into which job roles and which competency or skills do they speak to? So that when I meet someone, say who is a financial analyst, and I'm telling them about myself, I am sharing a story that is relevant to that role. I am not telling them about my time when I did risk analysis or when I did IT integration. I'm speaking specifically to what I need to be successful in that role.
Yeah.
Before, sure. I would try to say, oh, I've had 18 years experience, I've done this, I've done that. And I realized it wasn't taking me anywhere because nobody, the person who was listening to me would not know how to help me because I was all over the place.
Bottom line, you have to streamline it and make it a specialty, right?
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing. And Oluwatosin wants to know, he says, I've been trying to apply for jobs from another country. How is it possible to get a media-related job, knowing fully well it's a competitive field, especially in some provinces? Anyone wants to jump in? Taiwo or
if I may just speak to that quickly. So I know that there's some, from my experience, I'm not in media, but I sort of done something related to that.
You're
Uh,
close.
Close to that, yes, because theater and all that. But my experience is that instead of looking at the big media outfit, you might need to start small. So what I did, for example, at University of Victoria, we have like a community or university radio station. And basically that was where I started mine, for example, like reached out to them, produce stuff for them, podcast for them. Then from there start reaching out to other places. The Canadian experience is very important. That cannot be overemphasized. And I think that it might be important to start looking what are those places that I can gain those experiences, just like Chidimma was saying, because it's actually those small experiences that will amount to the bigger story that you're looking for. So maybe it might be important, it might be, worthwhile to sort of scale back and look at in your environment around you, what are those small media outlets, maybe it's newspaper, depending on the aspect of media that the person asking the question is really looking out for, that you can actually reach out to and volunteer with them or do something for them on a very small scale, and that's gonna build up. And for me, that's basically what I did. From that, I was hired to do an entire season of a podcast, like 11 seasons, right? So an entire season of 11 episodes, but really starting on that very small level. So that would be my sense. And of course, again, I think that many times some of the experiences that we've had out of Canada, what I've learned is that there is a way you can actually turn those stories to have, for all people that are hearing that in Canada, to understand that I've had similar experiences, just like Chidimma was saying, bring those stories here and say, well, this is what I was doing, where I'm coming from. And what's that same language here? How does that work? Now,
Okay.
the other thing I'm gonna add to that is perhaps this might be because I came straight into university. I mean, to study rather. I find that going for conferences or job fair and all of those, they're really very helpful. And I've been able to attend some of them myself, whether as someone looking for job or someone being on the other side and trying to put people through how to do that, because that sort of just opens you up to meet different people. And
Yeah.
again, that's how you create that relationship. That's how you create that network. So I know what all that I'm saying might be applied to other job, but I think even in this, specifically in terms of media, those are very, very useful, tips that I find, in my own
Okay.
little experience, obviously.
Thank you for sharing. And I guess the person who asked the question is actually not yet in Canada, and they're wondering how
Yeah.
they can actually apply for a job when they're still, for example, in their country back in Africa. I don't know if any, and
I
that was great.
can
Yeah, Otis.
I can add to that.
Yeah, please.
Just more generally speaking, we will likely end up in the Canadian experience talk anyway, because that's a big part of it, where it's sort of how can I get experience without getting the experience, right? How can I get the Canadian experience without having the opportunity to actually demonstrate that I'm actually good at doing what I can do. So we obviously help through our organization Access Community Capital Fund. We do have our foreign credential recognition loans program, which is meant to facilitate newcomers, internationally trained professionals transition into their professions or pursue a new career here by pursuing any certification or any type of bridging program that they may need by offering them the financial the funds to do that. This is a program funded through the government of Canada, so we offer loans up to 15,000. So what I'm driving at is there are these programs that once you are in Canada, they actually help you in terms of advancing the skills that you need in that particular profession. There are bridging programs that are specific to media. I know one that Trudy, you may be familiar with. Gertrude is connected with that as well. It's a bridging program offered here. So there are those things that may need to be it may be challenged to apply from outside of the country and get certain positions and certain jobs, or you may need to be here in order to really take advantage of that. So in most cases, there may be a process that you need to go through, taking that course, taking those certifications, expanding your networks, in addition to what Taiwo has said, and all of those other things, and really look at what opportunities exist. Some people do freelance, end up doing that as well. So it's all about being in the place and finding what is the best avenues to explore and to take advantage of those opportunities.
Okay, thank you so much,
Can I just quickly add to that question, Trudy?
Yeah, briefly.
Okay, yes, and I'm just sharing my experience because I've had to hire on my team recently, and we did have an applicant that was not in Canada. And the person actually went through, when it got to the time of the final interview that we realized the person wasn't in Canada. So two things I just wanted to say. That first of all, when you're not in Canada, the first question you have to ask yourself, do you already have the documentation and approval to work in Canada? Because most of the applications will screen you out once you say no, right? But say you do have the documentation and you have the approval. The next question is, do you have a Canadian presence? So if I'm looking at a resume and I'm seeing an international number, chances are I will not call it, right? Most times, and especially now that we're in a virtual world, the first couple of interviews you do will probably be a telephone screening. Can you be reached in a Canadian number? People I know, like the person I talked about, he had a VoIP line. I'm not a tech person, but like you have these lines that are Canadian lines, but it's not roam, like it's an internet phone. So you can, wherever you are in the country, they dial the Canadian number and they reach you on. So that's the next question I'm going to ask you. Like, do you have access to be reached on a Canadian number? You might want to get that. That increases your chances of getting a call back from an employer. Mm-hmm. If an employer sees an international number, the chances of calling that person drops significantly. So those are the two tips I just wanted to drop here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. That is very helpful, especially for the person applying from outside Canada. So we are really doing bad on time, but I'd like to understand, and this is what many people who are watching would like to know, are there any specific challenges as immigrants from Africa you feel like you face because you come from Africa? That I know that every immigrant faces challenges, and there are similar challenges on this journey to success, but are there any specific ones you feel that you have faced on your journeys because you come from Africa? Otis?
I wouldn't say particularly that because I'm from Africa or from Zimbabwe, that I've faced anything that I can point to or trace back to my origins. I think it just comes up back to that Canadian experience that we're talking about, where yes, Canada attracts all this talent, attracts all the skilled professionals, and then when you get here, you face sort of those challenges in terms of the system in which, or employers in which they are looking at someone who has Canadian experience, well, as if to discount the experience that you already have. So I think we all touched on, and Chidimma pretty much touched on how to dissect that and to really speak to how relevant the experience that you're bringing, that it's still applicable here. You can still do something that the same thing that someone who probably was educated here can still do. But I think you still have to prove yourself. So there's still that way you have to demonstrate that you really fit the bill, so to speak. And I think the Canadian experience has always been a topical point of discussion in terms of whether it's, in terms of how it negates some of us or most of internationally trained professionals from being considered equally in the labor market vis-a-vis someone who probably who's educated here or who has experience from Canada directly. So I think part of what the government is trying to do is to provide a way that makes that a little bit more less less of a challenge by these programs that I've talked about, where yes, there are certain professions you need to get the license before you can actually work in regulated professions, say healthcare and so on. If you're a dentist trained outside of Canada, you can just come here and become a dentist. Obviously, you need to get your license first before practicing, as an example. So I think there are those opportunities. So it's more about demonstrating the experience than it is about where I'm from in terms of origins. Of course, there may be those subtle ways in which that may be happening in the system in a subtle way, which may not be quite covert or apparent. The way these nuances talked about if your name is not quite sounding Canadian or and so on. So in some cases, it's not apparent. You don't know whether that's the reason. It may be the case, but it may not be apparent. But it could play into that. But for me, directly, I wouldn't pinpoint to anything that really I would say. It can only be perception, right? Okay. You're not going to have an opportunity. Someone says, well, it's because you're from Zimbabwe, therefore we are not going to hire you.
But obviously they won't tell it to your face.
Yeah, they won't tell it to your face. So that's the thing. And it's hard to know. You can only surmise. And then from there, it can only breed sort of those negative perceptions about your self-worth and how your experience may or may not compare in the new setting that you're in.
Okay, thank you for sharing. And Taiwo, you mentioned that being the only Black in the class, or rather the only person who looks like this, quoting you, like you said, is there any specific challenges you have faced on your journey, your immigration journey, and you think it's because of your background or something?
I think for me, I don't think in the framework of problems and all that, and I don't see the way I look. I don't see that as a barrier. Again, we think differently in some of these things. I rather see that as an opportunity. What can I? And many times I realize that I have to tell people I have to teach people or tell them something that they do not know in a very respectful and all of that. Yeah. But I don't really see that as a barrier in a sense. For me, I feel that that's an opportunity that I can leverage. Okay. And again, I'm speaking in those terms because my mindset is very important. If I start thinking at this level, if I start thinking from the framework of problem, it's because of how I look, it's because of the fact that I'm different. What I did, for example, was it's in my department, later on started having other people join us, started thinking there is nothing like African theater. So I started a course called African Theater, and I taught, twice, two semester, thanks to my, to my dean and to my chair, obviously, and of course to my supervisor, who kind of, who did help me through that process. Rather than me saying that, because when I came into the department, I realized that it's just very, the curriculum, there is no mention of, I'm like, we have a lot of African theater. But then I said, well, there's nobody to teach that because they don't have that experience or that,
exactly.
Reality. How can I use that too?
And I turn the challenges into opportunities.
Yeah, and I think for me, that's the framework that I think, that I work, and I choose to stay like that because that has sort of opened opportunities for me. Instead of when I've done presentations before where people did not really hear me. And I started asking myself, okay, I think I need to do something about my communication. How do I articulate my words in a better way? Or how do I, some of those practical things that I think that are important for me moving forward. So I think, again, I'm very cautious and I acknowledge my own privilege and of course my own reality, obviously. But for me, those are the framework that I think, and it's been working. I have to say that, so that I see opportunities, those differences in a way. Yes, I look different, I talk different, I do everything differently. But how can I leverage on that to become an opportunity? Whether getting other allies, to work with me, or championing a particular cause, and things like that. And I really find that that's been very valuable.
Okay, thank you so much, Taiwo, for sharing. And Chidimma, I know you're really burning to add on to that, right?
Yes, because
But I'm going to
think
ask you to be very, very brief. Yeah.
no problem. I do think that there are cultural differences that we have as Africans that could impact our integration and getting a job here in Canada. One difference is the fact that as Africans, we're mostly direct. And as for those of us who've been in Canada, you know, it's rare to see a Canadian who would speak to you directly. And I'm going to give an example. A friend went for an interview.
I thought it was the other way around.
No, I think we're
very direct. Yeah, we're very direct.
We're very direct. Yeah.
We are, yes.
And I wanted to give a practical example. A friend went for an interview and her role was a people manager role. And she was asked, if you have a team member who consistently doesn't meet deadlines and consistently is a cause of friction within the team, how would you manage that? And especially when the person has done something that has cost the company money. And, you know, just based off the way we would do things back home, she just said, oh, I'm going to give the person a query, right? And she told me that immediately she said that, she saw kind of like shock on the face of the person who was interviewing her, right? And, you know, just in hindsight, when we're having the conversation, I told her, look, being in Canada now and having worked in Canada, let me tell you how this would be approached by a people manager. A people manager should come into this situation with the fact that there is a reason why this person is acting this way, and should come with the mindset of trying to understand why, right? So sometimes when we come in, like for us, it's straight up, the person is not measuring up, give the person a query, because that is the way things are done back home.
Yeah.
When you come in here, you need to understand that there's some cultural differences to how a problem is approached. I was volunteering in my children's school and a little child was chewing on crayon. And to my amazement, the teacher said, wow, that looks like an interesting interesting meal or interesting snack, she said. What food group is it? And in my mind, I was like, this is a 4-year-old girl, just tell her to stop eating it. But the interesting thing was the child looked at the crayon and said, no, I'm just being silly, it's a crayon. And she put it aside. And it taught me a big lesson about how we approach problems, right? Yeah. As an African woman and as an African mother, like I would say, stop that. Like straight up, I'll tell the child, stop that. But in this instance here.
And you won't spare the road.
Exactly. The children are taught to think for themselves and come to the conclusion, the same conclusion that you want them to come to. But this time you are pushing them to come. So sometimes that mentality affects the way we respond to interview questions. And it does impact our ability to get jobs sometimes. It's something we need to be conscious about. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. We're going to take just one question, and then we will ask you panelists to share about any African community resources that could be helpful for all African immigrants in Canada and those who are willing to come to Canada, right? I know that Chidimma already shared, so we are good on that. She already shared about her Association of African Black Women Accountants. Yeah, was it that, Chidimma?
It's called the Black Female Accountants Network.
Yeah, exactly. So she shared about that, and if you simply Google that, you would really find it, I guess. Are there any that Otis
on LinkedIn?
On LinkedIn?
Go on LinkedIn and search it up, and you'll find it there. Yeah.
Okay.
Just so connection request. Yeah.
Thank you, Otis and Taiwo. Are there any community resources you would like to share for other Black or rather African immigrants?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say here is there are resources or programs out there that we should take advantage of as opportunities. I'll speak as an example, our organization. We are a charitable organization at Access Community Capital Fund. We do help and assist individuals who want to start a business here. Obviously, we're in microfinance. It's really meant to help those who face financial barriers. We know when you're in Canada, if you don't have credit or you start to build your credit, you may not have the opportunity to get a loan to help you start a business or to pay for your career-related expenses. So those are key programs that were not available when I came to Canada. And so several years later, there are these programs that I think we need to leverage and take advantage of and look at them as opportunities to actually help us think in terms of either creating employment for, self-employment for ourselves, as well as leveraging to further ourselves in our professions by taking advantage of those.
Thank you so much, Otis. And Taiwo, are there any community supports in your area in Victoria?
Yes, so in Victoria, we have Intercultural Association of Greater Victoria. They do not work specifically with Blacks, but they work with immigrants and refugees. And there's a Victoria Immigrant Center Society, and they really have different programs, employment. They even help immigrants to, look at their CV. They have a lot of clinic sessions where they clean their CV up, where they help them, prep them through different, scenarios and things like that. And I think that a lot of immigrants have really find that very useful. Now in Victoria, there are a lot of societies that are specifically Black, but the African community, but it's not specifically for jobs and all that, but it's a way to build community and connect, just like we've been talking about the role of community.
And networks.
There's the Black History Society. There is I think there's what called the Beehive, Vancouver Island African Society. I think that's what they call it. So we have many of them like that. When it comes to employment and gaining, meaningful employment, meaningful in quotes, like Otis was saying, ICA and VERX are really good. Of course, we have government opportunities out there to BC work, different departments that are really helping in different ways.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So Chidimma, Taiwo, and Otis are on LinkedIn, and I know they can continue to give some of these resources. Am I right? Yeah, sure. So you can connect with them on LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, just sign up and then send them a request, and then they can give you some of these tips beyond this webinar. So let's just take the last question, because Shanghai.
Trudy, if I may just add something, sorry. So as an artist, I just wanted to use that opportunity to say that, because I think a lot of we rarely talk about artists in jobs and all of that in Canada. In Victoria, for example, there is a really ongoing conversation right now where the art and culture sector are really opening up to Black and people of color. So the theater that I work at, Belfry Theater, and some other theater in community, they are working on different programs in integrating different, artists of diverse, diverse background. And I think that's important too, because as artists and creators, we don't really have opportunities of gaining like long-term, employment, like you're working in financial sector or in IT, and we're constantly looking for ways to build that Canadian experience. So there are many opportunities like that here too in Victoria, specifically for artists that might be moving here and they really want to connect to opportunities.
Okay, so we have a last question from Shingai. She asked, volunteer work is very important in Canada. How important is it to volunteer, to do volunteer work in a field that is relevant to your field? And I know Chidimma and Otis really shared diversely about that. And so Shingai can actually get in touch and get to know more. And we also have done a lot of webinars in the past about volunteering and networking. So you guys can check Café New Canadians and find out some of these resources. Yeah, so unless Otis and
sure, I can answer that. So I think with volunteering, you have to do two things. Be intentional in terms of looking at what opportunities are relevant to what the skills you want to learn or contribute, especially even if it's aligned with your profession. That's great. It also is in line with your interests as well, your passions. So I think it's more important to think of it in that sense. And if it's more career oriented, then you look for relevant opportunities. You may not get ones that are so directly connected to what you're looking for or what you have in mind, but if there are some that are close to or related to what you want to do, then I would advise that you pursue those, because still it's all about opening the opportunities and creating the networks.
Thank you so much, Otis, and thank you everyone who has attended this webinar, and thank you, Chidimma, thank you, Taiwo. thank you everybody who has watched this session of Café New Canadians. Now, it has certainly been a very good conversation, and we continue to bring you these conversations on employment and all matters that are very much importance to newcomers in Canada. So remember, Café New Canadians brings you this, rather Café New Canadians is brought to you by New Canadians TV, web and TV series. I told you earlier at the beginning that we are on Omni Television, and we are also on our different social media channels. You can follow us on New Canadians on Facebook, New Canadians on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on Telegram. Be sure to also get to our newsletter. We have a newsletter, and you can subscribe to that to get all the information on immigration, settlement, employment, education, and small businesses. And we'll continue, like I said, to bring you these conversations. Stay tuned to Café New Canadians page and see what's coming up for next week. And if you are on Zoom, please stay behind for just a few minutes and help us answer a survey. Tell us how we can do better. Tell us what we can talk to you about, the topics, the people that you want to hear from. Give us some ideas and tell us how we're doing generally and what you would love to see improved and what you would love to be discussed. And thank you so much from me and the team at New Canadians. Thank you, and everyone have a good night.